What is up, YouTube? We are back out in the garage messing around on some more of this Sportster monstrosity basket case fire bike. Lots and lots and lots of issues that I did not anticipate on a quick flip that this was supposed to be. That's okay. I like working on the inside of motor stuff, and now I get to experiment a little bit more than typical, more so than I normally do. I got the flywheel out. Pinion and all this stuff is good. Everything checks out on the pinion side. Not a ton of play over there. Everything feels good. Rods and pistons feel really good in the flywheel. This is going to get replaced. I'm replacing the entire primary side bearing assembly because the other bearing, the primary side one's fine, or the crankshaft flywheel side is good. This bearing's in good shape. The one that I pulled out of the primary is not in that good of shape. The outside of the cage looks like it kind of got pounded in or pressed in, a little crooked or something. Kind of looks like it got beat on, and I can't take the blame for that. Normally it's my fault because I bash things with hammers when I get frustrated, and during a rebuild, that'll happen. I didn't do that this time, but the bearing didn't look good, so I'm going to replace the bearing, which kind of sucks. You can buy some cheapo repop Chinese ones for, I don't know, 25, 30 bucks for like the base. Super affordable, not bad, but on the internals of the motors, I'd like to spend a little bit more money and get a better bearing set, which is exactly what I'm going to do here. I think the imported no-name brand bearings you can get, when I looked on V-Twin, there was three price points, so you get your $28, $30 bearings, you get your $48, $60 bearings, somewhere in between there, and then you can get actual Timkins, which is what this should have, which are about 100 bucks cost. So still kind of pricey. I think they retail like 140, 150 bucks, but I'm okay with spending a little bit of extra cash, getting better parts, hopefully. In other news, I posted a short little clip of these fancy cylinders. These are freshly coated, gloss black, single stage. If you use, not that everybody on here is powder coaters, but I got a powder coating shop, got a couple different versions. Super Mirror Black tends to be the standard gloss black generic powder. This is actually one step down from the gloss level of that. It's a sheen black. I think it's like an 85% gloss level. Normally this is what I use, and then I'll clear coat everything if a customer comes in with a set of wheels. The Harley wheels, I just posted the disassembly and reassembly of the tires and the bearings. That was a sheen black with a clear coat. It holds up a little bit better, and you have that clear coat protection, so any of the spider web slash fine micro scratches that you get in a gloss black finish is in the clear coat as opposed to in the black. This is a single stage, but I'm super happy with it. Came out really nice. Single stage gloss black on cylinders. I really like doing this. I think, I don't have my bagger here anymore. I use a semi-gloss black on the chopper. When I put this motor together, it holds up awesome. Super Glide has been disassembled and reassembled and never been touched. But on the shovel head, it is bare blasted heads, and they age out. You know, they work, they just don't hold up all that well. The cases on this bike are coated. Cases on this bike I think are still raw, and then on the bagger, it's pretty much the same thing. It's blasted heads, blasted primary, blasted everything without any coating on there. On that bike, I really didn't want to add anything to it. However, on this one, I will be coating the cases too in a blasted aluminum finish, so it's going to have a nice factory looking finish, but it will clean up and oil will wipe off. Same thing on the jugs. I thought about just kind of leaving it crusty, but now this is what we're looking at. Super fresh, super clean cylinders. Here's my heads. One of these things is not like the other. So today's project, if you will, I'm going to disassemble these heads, I'm going to pull the rockers off, clean all of this up, and then disassemble these heads, yank the valves out of here. I'm going to be doing a little bit of port work on these just to get it better. I'm not going crazy. I'm not doing a crazy hog out the entire cylinder head trying to make 1,000,000 horsepower. But I am going to clean it up and make it run better than it was factory. So I'm going to knock down all the casting imperfections in the exhaust and the intake port, clean those up a little bit. Might do a little bit of work around the valve seats. Again, not going over the top. I'll spend a couple hours just cleaning it up, making it run better, because they need to get cleaned up anyway. If they already need to be cleaned up and the valves are out, I might as well spend a couple hours, smooth it out, make it run a little bit better than it did before while I'm already in there. And then I can double check and make sure there's not a ton of slop or issues on the valves in the guides or anything like that. I have one more parts order I got to put in to finalize everything else for this bike, but that's going to be dependent on what I find when I yank these heads apart. So I will get you guys set up on a tripod and blast these heads apart, pull the valves. Not going to do any porting in this video. I might do a quick time lapse of that down the line. It's not the most exciting nor the most fun thing to watch. Basically just looking for casting imperfections and sanding them relatively smoother. So let me get you guys set up. We'll throw you on a tripod. This might be a time lapse on the removal of these, but pull the rockers off and then some valve disassembly. Got you set up on the tripod. Hopefully you guys stay out of my way. I don't know how well this actually works, because no matter what it is I'm working on, you guys end up in the way at some point or another. You got 1 million half-inch bolts, and by 1 million I mean 7, 6, 8, 7. I think it's 7. But we'll blast the rockers apart. Half-inch heads. These look like chrome ones, so I'm guessing somebody probably put a Colony hardware kit on here. That pulls off your rocker boxes. I'm going to leave all the bolts in so I don't lose them. Gaskets are all going to get replaced at a later date. Now is also the time you want to go through and double check all of the rockers. Make sure that these are smooth and free. You do not want any binding or tension on these. These are actually a little tighter than I'd want them to be, so I might look into that a little bit later. But there's your rockers. I'll leave this. I'm running out of bench space here. Maybe if I didn't have 9 million carburetors, that wouldn't be a problem. But rockers are off. Everything else is super dirty, super crusty. This can stay like this. I'm going to disassemble the rockers first, and then we'll pull the valves out. The order on this doesn't really matter. On the bottom side, you do have your oil passages, which will give you that is your telltale sign for which head is which. I'm not too concerned about that right now. The valves, on the other hand, I will actually have to look at, because the valves and the valve guides all press in together. Your intake one is the one with the rib on the inside, because this runs O-rings. So you need to make sure that these stay lined up like so. There's your exhaust, there's your intake, there's your intake. So exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. However, on the actual bike, this will get turned off because the exhaust comes out the right side, which means that this is the rear and this is the front, just like that. So that's how that's going to sit if it were assembled on the motor. You have both going this way. Let me dig out a tackle box. I got one little tackle box with all of the valve markings on there, so when I disassemble these, all of the parts and the collars and the little retainers for the valves and the springs will all go back exactly like they were. So let me dig that out before we go any further. Well, I took about 2 seconds and looked for my tackle box. I don't know where I put it. It's somewhere underneath this workbench, but I think it's filled up buried underneath a bin of Ford parts that are heavy. So front exhaust, front intake, rear exhaust, rear intake. Got everything laid out on a super fancy shop rag, labeled, and we will go from there. All right, to pop the heads apart, you do need a valve spring compressor. This is a super fancy, high quality Chinese repop cheapo one from Amazon. Per usual, it's not the fastest one in the world, but it does work pretty well. So what we're gonna do here is get this queued up. You have one with a tensioner adjuster that will thread into here. I think this tool was, I don't know, 25, 30 bucks or something. I've used it on 2 small block Ford V8s. Honestly, I like these ones much better for motorcycles because they tend to taper down a lot smaller. Then I need to grab a magnet here in a second, and we will use that to pull the little collars out. And I'll show you guys how to do this in a second. Okay, I got a big magnet. It's bigger than the one that I wanted, but that's what I just found. On these, you got 2 parts on this. Both have little ball bearing retainers on a spring. This side is not adjustable, so we're not really going to use that one. This is what I'm going to use to press onto the valve, the face of the valve. This one, on the other hand, with the hole on the end of it, they come with this fancy little guide pin. This is what I can use to torque that down. Then this kit comes with a plethora of little collector deals that are slotted. This is what we're going to use to get the magnet in to pull the collars off. And then we just need to essentially lay this out, slip it over the valve, and then tighten them down, compress the spring. This will give me room to get a magnet in there to pull the collars. So not perfect. There's definitely more efficient tools and methods of doing this, but this has worked for me. Balling on a budget, if you will. It's been a while since I worked on Sportsters like this. Old school designs. Haven't changed all that much over the years. So I'll set this into the valve pocket, like so. Now it's just a matter of aligning this. The worst part is just getting them started because I have lots of moving parts. So right here, like so, if I hold this down, this is way easier if you have a vise and a way to jig this up a little bit more. I don't. So I try and lock this into the center of the valve. Exhaust valves tend to be a little bit easier than the intake valves, but right there, set up. This is kind of floating. Line this up close to center on the valve, like so. And we're going to hold the tool in place and tighten down this side. You don't want it walking around like this, like I'm doing right now in this terrible example. Like I said, proper tools in this sense would go a very long way. There's kind of different ways to jig this up. I'm going to leave this right here, right at the end of the bench. Then we'll just crank this down to compress the spring. You might want a disclaimer on this because this isn't really the safest thing in the world, but these are the little collars. These are what hold your valve springs in. Come on, focus. You got 2 of these on every valve. Same thing on the bigger V8 stuff. Despite all of the technology and all of the new things. This one is the front exhaust. So I'm going to set these 2 little tappets down. But those little collars are all that hold the spring tension in on these valve train components. So now I'll walk this off, take the tension off. And once I get the tension off of this, the spring and the collar up top will all fall off. Maybe one day I'll buy nicer valve tools. I do this enough. I feel like that might be justified. But again, cheap bastard. If it's a little more work, you deal with it. Now our springs will come out. You got double stack of springs. Ooh, these aren't even knurled retainers. Fancy. This will go in the front exhaust section. And then the valve will pop down like so. We're going to back cut all of these, get this high ridge off of here, and blast and coat the faces in a high temp ceramic coating as well. But for right now, I will drop all of this back together just the way it came out. Don't forget your lower collar as well, or a giant one because that was closer. This shouldn't be that tight on the valve guide. In theory, this should slide right off, like so. I don't know why that one's sitting on there so tight, but there, the valve is free. Gotta do the same thing on the front side, and then I just lay it out on my super fancy shop towel template. So I'll set you guys back over here. and we'll yank this intake valve. Intake valve's bigger, so it actually might be a little bit easier. Everything on these seems just so small. So used to doing shovel head stuff, I'm not used to doing tiny little Ironhead things like this, but same deal. I got the tool on the bottom aligned in the center of the valve pocket, the center of the machined area. Lock this down. And right now, you guys can see the little retainer is split. One sitting higher than the other because it's hung up on the valve. So let me put a magnet in there and see if I can pop these out. Takes a little bit to get them all the way separated. Like so. That pulled both of them out together at once. This is the front intake one. And we'll chalk it back up and do the same thing in reverse. It's a little bit easier when the actual valve, like so, on the bottom side actually, before I disassemble this, you can see that this little rod is in the center of the intake valve. The intake valve has a deeper chamfer into the center, so that actually helps a little bit. I know I'm being very nonchalant about this. If you've never done this before, be a little bit more cautious. These springs are under a good amount of pressure, and if you're not careful and this walks out on you, you will send your spring retainers, your collets, the little valve keepers, all of these parts will go shooting across the shop, if not right into your eyeball. So use a little bit of caution with that. Don't mind my negligence. Done this enough times, but I've also been on the other end of that and sent plenty of parts flying across the shop. Losing those little retainers is probably the worst of it. Not at all uncommon, but right now this is coming out super crooked. Not ideal in any way, shape, or form, but we are removing spring pressure. I would not want to crank it down this way, but I'm also kind of screwing myself over here because now I'm getting stuck on the intake because of my negligence. Don't do what I did. Let me loosen this side, and then we're going to walk this over. It is locked in under spring tension, so this could get a little sketchy, like so. But again, I kind of knew what to expect there. Spring, upper retainer, lower retainer that comes out just like that, like it's supposed to. Lift this up, press the valve through. I'm not going to worry about the valve free play in the guides yet. I like to reassemble them all back together like so, and then just set them over on the sheet of paper towel. And that's roughly a bare head. You can see how dirty these are on the inside. Ton of carbon built up around the exhaust port here. I don't know how well this is going to pick up on camera, but this polished edge is where the valve actually seals. That's what you really want, the one on the intake here. The exhaust one, completely carboned up. We're not going to remachine the seats because I don't have access to that, but we are going to use some valve lapping compound and clean up those seats. And we're going to do some porting on the intake. You can see this little rust puddle at the bottom here. We'll do a little bit of porting on the intake, just kind of knock down all these high edges, get everything smoothed out and flowing better. Same thing on the exhaust. So quick glance, haven't really looked at these, but quick glance, lots of cleanup will make a world of difference in runnability and performance. I'm not pounding the valve guides out or anything like that yet. Once everything's cleaned up, I will put the valves back together. And once the valves go back together in the guides, then I will kind of double check. If there's any free play, then I will drop this off with the same guy that's doing the cylinders for me to have the heads reworked as well. At this juncture, all of my wanting to do everything on a budget is not thrown out the window per se, but when the entire motor's already apart, you're kind of stuck at this point, right? Like, I'm not going to skimp out on another $100 to get the heads reworked just because I'm that cheap. so heads are completely broken down. Not completely, that's a lie. Heads are broken down, valve train is removed, springs are removed, collets and retainers are removed. Spark plugs are still in, those don't really matter, I just like leaving those in. Even before blasting, I don't like blasting on the threads on the aluminum heads, like so. I like to just leave a junky set of plugs in there and blast around them. On the other side of that, here's the rough template. Don't mind the oil all over the floor, but there's the rough template. Front exhaust, front intake, rear exhaust, rear intake, everything's just kind of laid out. I will be going through and cleaning up and back cutting all of these valves too. I gotta double check, make sure everything fits in the valve guides okay. If it works and everything's in spec, then we're good to go. If not, I might send this over to the same guy that's doing my cylinders and just have him, he's got a valve grinder where he can actually recut all these valves for me and probably do a little bit better of a job, other than my approach of chucking these up in the drill press and hitting them with a hand file like I normally do for quick down and dirty tips. So on the chambers, what we're gonna do is clean up all the crappy porous castings in here, get these smoothed out, not going crazy. It actually looks like somebody might have taken a grinder to the inside edge of that bowl already. We're going to clean these up a little bit better than that. These are going to get completely sandblasted back to bare metal so I can kind of see what I'm working with. Right now everything's covered in carbon and super dark, dirty, grimy. Then I'll drop the valves back in, double check. If I need to put new valve guides in, they're not crazy expensive. Like I said, I don't want to be throwing a ton of money at this bike, but we're already most of the way there. I forgot how heavy these are. Playing with shovel heads and aluminum heads are fantastic compared to these old iron heads, if you didn't know why they're called that. Cast iron heads, heavier than crap, but we will mess around with those tomorrow. I'll bring those over to the indie shop after I get them all blasted and cleaned up and ported. Then he can give me his opinion. Like I said, if it costs me a little bit more cash to set this up and do it the right way, now is the time to do it. I don't care about the frame, I don't care about the rest of this bike, but the motor, I take pride in those things, and I'm not going to sell a bike that I know has mechanical internal problems. Some people will. You buy a random chopper off the internet and, oh, motor was rebuilt, oh, this was done, whatever. This is all documented. Everything that I'm doing right or wrong, we're going to try this. Never done it this way, but all of my bikes run really well. I take pride in that. The car stuff, well, they run well. Some of them still have old car issues. Some of the bikes still have old car issues. But all of my own personal vehicles have been completely rebuilt, completely redone. I've got the road test miles to prove that, and that's how I like setting things up. Even if I'm not making $1 million on this Sporty, when I go to sell it at some point or when I find another project that I need to replace it with, I will know that the motor is rock solid. Do it once, it will last quite a while. Half-ass it, buy a project bike that was freshly rebuilt like my Sporty, the first chopper I built, fresh rebuilt motor. Well, I ended up having to do cylinders, rings, primary tensioner shoe, which I don't necessarily count to the fresh rebuilt motor, but it was burning oil like crazy. They horrendously messed up the top end clearances. Politely, it was effed up really bad. So got all that fixed. Thing ran like a top, wasn't burning oil, wasn't smoking, wasn't doing anything else. A couple of oil leaks here and there on old cases and things like that is one thing, but mechanically on the internals, I want everything to be set up. A little bit of porting right now will give me a little bit more power and run a little bit better, so that's where we're at. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those fun things. I am trying to hit that 500 mark, so if you guys can do me a favor and hit that subscribe button wherever it is on here. I don't know. I don't think I actually put it in the video. I don't know what I do 90% of the time in post, the editing portion of this. I remember what I record, kind of, and then forget how far I got on other things. But please hit the subscribe button. Trying to hit that 500 by New Year's. Help me out. Means a ton to me. Doesn't mean much for you other than I don't know what happens when you hit subscribe. Maybe they give you a trophy or balloons fall from the ceiling, all of those fun things. But thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys later.